It's the Boris Dirk podcast. We are back on opening day of the NBA season. We are recording this after the two opening tip games between the Lakers and Wolves, which they just won, and the Knicks and Celtics. But this is going to be our official predictions for the NBA season coming up, a highly anticipated NBA season. And we're not going to talk about how the Knicks got absolutely demolished by Boston tonight and didn't look close to their level. That's not going to be a topic of discussion for tonight. But Drew, first, how you doing?
Good, man. Just to be clear for our audience, we locked in these predictions before the two games began. It's going to be a quick one, but we just couldn't get the new season going without making a couple big picture picks. So let's fucking do it.
Let's do it. All right, let's start with the most important thing. Who are your final four team predictions? Who's going to be in the Western Conference Finals and who's going to be in the Eastern Conference Finals? And what's the result?
In the East, I have Boston over the New York Knicks. In the West, I have OKC over Denver. And I have OKC beating Boston in the NBA Finals and getting the Thunder's first ring.
All right. Not going to be a lot of disagreement here. I have Boston over the Knicks in the East. If I had to pick a third team that, if a team besides those two made the East Finals, I would pick probably Milwaukee as the third most likely. And then in the West, I have the Thunder winning the West, and I have them doing it. It'll depend on how the bracket falls, who gets the two seed, who gets the four seed, all that. And in the West over the years, that has historically been decided by just a couple of games. I'm going to say Thunder over Dallas because I think Dallas is going to be a really good regular season team and secure that two seed, which will give them a nice path to the conference finals. But yeah, I will say OKC over Dallas. And also, I think OKC is going to win the championship this year. In doing all the offseason prep this year, I've just been blown away with how much talent they have up and down the roster. I trust Shea in the last minutes of a game more than almost anyone in the league, and I think more than anyone on Boston in that hypothetical matchup. I think Jalen Williams is potentially going to become a household name this year in a way that he hasn't to this point going into his third season. Chet Holmgren in his second full year in the NBA. This is a team that could have three All-Stars this year with those three guys, especially if they win a lot of games. And just the amount of young talent on their roster, defensive talent. This is a team that can be one of the two to three best both offenses and defenses in the league. They just have all the ingredients. The only thing working against them is experience, but I think it's a pretty unique group of guys, and they were able to get some of that experience last year.
One of the crazy things about the Thunder offense is despite their best players not being really high volume 3-point shooters, they still are really good at the math game. They take a ton of threes. And still, guys like SGA, J Dub, even Chet to an extent, are really good at getting those tough buckets that are more important in the playoffs and less math game winning in the regular season. So they just look like a team that's set up to win around 60 games and then compete with absolutely anyone, depending on how the bracket falls. But notice I said we locked in our picks before recording, in part because I don't know how I'd be feeling about my Knicks conference finals pick right now. And I hate overreacting. I'm usually the old man who likes to push back against the night of reactions. But this Bridges stuff is really scary. It is. And I have the Knicks in my more extended predictions. I have the Knicks as my 6th seed, and that's just in part because I'm worried about the depth now with Precious out for a few weeks and Mitch out until at least December 1st, which for someone his size with multiple ankle surgeries, I don't even know what that means anymore. Like, I'm predicting that Mitch will be back in 2025. So I'm worried about the Knicks. The depth is so vastly different. And even if they gel, I just think it's going to take a few months. And that's why I expect the Knicks to do something sort of resembling what Dallas did last year, kind of an unimpressive regular season and then a deep playoff run. The Bridges stuff is uncharted territory for us. They traded 5 first-round picks for an awesome player who it turns out has been pretty neurotic about his shooting form for years now. Like he said, he's changed it a lot over the years. I didn't notice that. I thought his jump shot looked pretty much the same his entire NBA career and going back to when he was at Villanova. 38% career shooter at volume, like one of the most consistent three-point shooters in the league off movement. And suddenly it looks like he has two new arms and he's like figuring out how to use them. That was baked into my putting the Knicks at 6, which obviously really pissed off my couple close friend Knicks fans I sent that to today after I spent 3 hours working on a playoff bracket after months of saying I never want to talk about playoff brackets because it's so matchup dependent. Today's been a whirlwind. So yeah, the Knicks, it's a wild experience right now. Don't want to overreact, but also who do we have as a reference point for what Bridges is going through right now? Your brother mentioned Fultz, but Fultz was never a high volume 3-point shooter. Like shooting was the first skill you mentioned in Bridges' offensive game. So, and I've never seen a guy really tinker with his jump shot in a major way mid-season and figure it out. He was 2 for 7 from three tonight, but the misses were bad and he just doesn't look super comfortable. He definitely bounced back in the second half after scoring maybe 0 points in the first half.
Yep.
But this is not the shooting weapon that New York thought it was trading 5 first round picks for. So it's a really scary night for Knicks territory. Maybe the best night in Brooklyn Nets franchise history. And I don't know what to think about the Knicks. The depth isn't what it was before now. It's like you're kind of like 7 deep unless one of the rookies is ready to go. Pacome Dadier plus 10 today in 13 minutes. Let's talk about that for 20 minutes.
Yep.
Kolek is awesome. I think Kolek is going to contribute, but it's just
He's
Deuce and Precious when he's healthy, and Mitch if he ever comes back. Like this is not a deep bench, and you need this closing five to be absolutely elite.
Yeah, and we don't have to go deep
Sorry.
into Nick Celtics from tonight. My quick thoughts. One, I have been monitoring the Josh Hart starting situation and have I felt going into the season that our best lineup to start is going to be with Deuce at the shooting guard and Hart coming off the bench. I just think having five shooters in the starting lineup, assuming Bridges is still a shooter,
Yeah.
is the best approach, and Hart can dominate the ball more with bench units. And he'll probably end up closing, but I just think getting the offense going with five shooters out there and Deuce still being a really good defender who can guard different types of guys, I think is good. Bridges, it's too early to comment. It's very worrying, but I'm not going to read too
Yeah.
much into one game. But, usually when you change a shot, it takes a while to change it back. So I don't know what the plan is there. I'm just going to hope that he figures it out or he has enough shooting talent that he can brute force his way through whatever this new form is. The rookies are going to need to play. It was encouraging that Dottie is already getting minutes and already has Tibbs's trust to be out there in game one of the season. I think Kolek is going to get there pretty soon and be taking Campaign's minutes because I don't think Campaign can be a viable, high minutes player anymore. And if Kevin McCullough ever gets healthy, Tibbs is going to love him too. And I don't know if he's going to be able to pull him off the floor. So the rookies are going to need to play. I think Deuce is going to end up needing to start, but I'm not going to overreact to one game. And the third thing is obviously winning a championship is great, but I think it might have had an especially great effect on these Celtics. Just my impression from the game today. We've seen them in the past, how they have a tendency to get really tight in certain situations. And I think a lot of it is because of that history of getting so close to the championship, never quite getting there, coming up short. And, all of the ridicule and clowning that they've taken over the years, some of the self-doubt I'm sure that's crept in. Now that they've reached that mountaintop, today they played like some of the most free basketball I've ever seen, where they were just playing with so much confidence. They have so much trust in their system, in each other, that they showed they're still the standard. And the Knicks have a hell of a long way to go to get there. And frankly, everyone in the East, I think, has a long way to go to get there. I think someone will, and they won't cruise through the Eastern playoffs in the same way that they did last year. But tonight cemented they are the class of the East, if not the league at the moment. And they're probably a better team once Porzingis gets back than they were last year.
Yeah. This just looked like a really liberated Tatum. Obviously, Tatum has had a stat line like tonight before in his career, but he just was playing very free. And the fact that he came in and hit 8 3-pointers after all the annoying can Tatum shoot discourse that I'm sure I fed into at some point this summer. He just came in, shut everyone up, looked like an MVP caliber player. Maybe he's in for his best season ever without the pressure of getting over that championship hump. With Denver, just real quick, I just think Prime Jokic with pretty much a league average supporting cast is a 53 win team unto itself. I'm just betting on Jamal Murray figuring it out, getting healthy. I think we underrate how close the Nuggets were to being right back in, the final four last year. The fact that they continued to fight after the Wolves' youth and athleticism punched them in the mouth in such a violent way, I think is a testament to the competitive will that this Nuggets team still has. I think Mike Malone's one of the best in the world at what he does. And I just sort of like betting against Luka at this point. I'm just not betting against Jokic. Like I can sleep well knowing I picked Jokic to drag a not so great supporting cast to the Final Four again.
Yeah, God, would I love a Denver Dallas series in the playoffs. Speaking of Luka and Jokic, and yeah, they were banged up and playing against a team that was the worst matchup for them, and that team doesn't exist anymore because the Timberwolves don't have Karl Anthony Towns anymore, and I don't think that Randall can provide the same sort of chest on chest or chest on back, as our friend Ricky G would say, defense that Karl Anthony Towns can. So that's less of a threat. They were close. They were up 20 in a game seven to go to the Western Conference Finals, where they would have played a team in Dallas who they match up with much better than they matched up with last year's Timberwolves. Like they were very close to making the finals last year, a year after winning the championship. So it's foolish to write them off, even though they're a less deep team. I fully agree with that. And to me, it's OKC, Denver, and Dallas as the class of the West in terms of championship aspirations, even if that's not necessarily one, two, three in the standings.
I will just say with Denver, if it doesn't work out, I think it'll be because they just don't have the shooting volume. Like Michael
Mhm.
Porter Jr. was talking about this last week that he and Strother are the only two high volume 3-point shooters on the team, and he's right. It's a big deal. Christian Brown has always been a decently efficient guy, but he barely takes more than one a game, if I remember correctly. Aaron Gordon, obviously not a reliable 3-point shooter, but does a million other things. And Jamal Murray is more of an off the dribble guy. Strother didn't like him coming out of Gonzaga because I just really didn't buy his ability to defend and kind of do anything but spot up. When you're playing with Jokic, maybe that's enough. Russ, obviously, I'm not a huge fan of the Russ acquisition. I've harped on that. Peyton Watson is a guy they've been hoping to get something out of for a couple of years now. Maybe this is the year it happens. But yeah, all right, let's move past Denver. You told me to bring an MVP prediction as well. Who do you have for that award?
I have Shea Gilgeous-Alexander for the MVP. I think the Oklahoma City Thunder are going to win an insane amount of games, and I've talked a lot about how good I think they are. And this is going to be a situation where I think they probably won't win as many games as Boston because Boston's going to be able to fatten up on the dregs of the East. But they're going to win. They're going to be the number one seed in the West, which is going to be an insanely competitive conference. And Shea's a top five player. He's an MVP worthy player. I think best player on the best team applies when you are clearly a, cream of the crop top 3 to 5 player. If you're like the Tatum case last year where he's more in the sort of 6 to 10 range, even though he's the best player on the best team, it's not as compelling. So Shea, MVP.
Yeah. And I think in a vacuum, Jokic would be my pick. I just don't see him getting his fourth now. So yeah, I put Shea down as well. I just think that the Thunder are going to win enough games and he's going to be elite enough that he kind of wins by default, which sounds disrespectful. Like Shea is unbelievable. And his defense also underratedly took a massive step last year. The dude is so disruptive on that end, as while also being obviously engine number one of one of the best offenses in the league. Okay, breakout player. This can always be interpreted in a million different ways, but who did you put down?
I hope I'm not stealing your thunder here, but I put down Cade Cunningham.
Oh,
Um,
no. I love it though. I put down someone else who I thought I might be stealing your thunder.
well, he might be the second guy on my list. But yeah, Cade, I am pretty high on the Pistons this year relative to expectations. They're only projected to win 24 and a half games by Vegas. And if I had access to a betting account, I would be hitting the over on that. I think they're going to be a much more organized team. I think Cade's going to thrive in a to hit what to him will feel like a wide open chasm of space around him, which to most NBA players is just average NBA space. I'm really excited to see how he looks with a full, healthy season behind him, and just the ability to play on a competent basketball team with shooting around him, a good role man. And now that he finally has his bearings in the league, I think he's it's funny for being a former number one overall pick, but I think he's extremely underrated.
Still love Cade. I think he's one of the best pick and roll quarterbacks on the planet and has had a really difficult hand dealt to him for this like first portion of his career. And so I hope you're right. And there are definitely more adults in the room now in Detroit. The guy I put down for breakout player is Jaime Jaquez. The Heat are getting old. Jimmy's, I think, 35 now. As much as Bam expands his offensive game, he just can't be like your number one guy on a really good NBA offense. He has to be playing off some real perimeter talent. Jaime had an awesome rookie year in which he averaged 12, 4, and 2.5, and a steal in 28 minutes per game. Caleb Martin is gone now. He's in Philadelphia. And yeah, I think Jaime is amazing. I underrated him as a prospect. His 3-point shooting has grown by leaps and bounds since just a couple of years ago at UCLA. He took 3 threes a game and shot 32% last year and still was almost 50% from the field because he gets such good looks inside the paint. Underrated athlete and so good with his back to the basket, especially when he's being guarded by smaller guys.
Yeah. Love the Jaime pick. I love Jaime Jaquez. I'll forever be haunted by how low I had him on my board, despite how much I loved him. The disparity between the words I was saying about him and the actual number on my big board that I assigned to him may have been the largest of any prospect I've evaluated, but I have to live with that. The other two guys who I guess you could have, they've kind of already broken out, but I'm expecting them to break into like the next phase. So like one going from a breakout player to a fringe star, and the other going from a fringe star to a firm all-star household name type guy. I mentioned Jalen Williams earlier. I think he has it in him to take that leap where he's averaging, low to mid 20s in points with 5 rebounds, 5 assists on really high efficiency. I don't even know if that would necessarily be an improvement that much on what he averaged last year, but I just think he's going to take the step with OKC being super prominent into like a household name all-star. And then my other favorite, Jalen Johnson, going from breakout player last year on the Hawks, who probably would have had a good chance to win most improved if he'd played enough games, to this year, I think making that leap towards being a fringe star, especially on a team in Atlanta that doesn't really have a secondary scoring option outside of Trey. I think he could have really high scoring numbers this year as he's sort of gets more comfort in the NBA. It's going to be his second real full season because he played so little as a rookie. And both those guys aren't really breakouts necessarily because they've, came on the scene last year to varying degrees, but I think that trajectory is only going to continue.
Kenny just ranked James Harden the 14th best player in the league on TNT. Oh god, contract year Kenny is just something else. Two other names that came to mind: Denny Avdia getting a real opportunity to almost run the show in Portland. Chauncey's come out in the last couple of weeks and said Denny's our best player. They just traded multiple picks and the pick that became Bub Carrington, whom I love, for Denny Avdia. So I think the front office and coaching staff is just determined to make Denny Avdia look really good, at least to the fan base, because these are the kind of antics we have going on right now in Portland. So Denny, and then also look out for year 3, Jeremy Sohan. All of the
Mm.
stuff in San Antonio right now is Wemby, obviously deservedly so, and Wemby having CP now to kind of mentor him and throw him lobs and be the point guard that Wemby has needed a year into his NBA career. And there's been a lot of Steph Castle buzz because Steph Castle's looked awesome in all the preseason summer league stuff. Year 3, Jeremy Sohan, I think, is going to put a lot of people on notice. I still really love that guy. The fact that Wemby can shoot makes it easier to play Sohan at the 4. And I wouldn't be surprised if over the next few years he becomes like Wemby's wonderful celebrated sidekick who does all the dirty work for a superstar player.
Yeah.
Team you're higher on than consensus.
So I mentioned the Pistons. I have a bold prediction for them coming up, so I'm going to hold off on that. And I'm going to say the Houston Rockets. And I'm not sure how much higher. I guess consensus has them in that 9-10 range, but I think a lot of people would probably be surprised if they knocked out, like Golden State from the play-in or something like that. And I think this team has a real chance to make the playoffs. They're a team that went 500 last year with an extremely young group. They're adding Steven Adams as a backup center, who is immediately one of the best backup centers in the league. All of their young guys are a year older and better. They drafted Reed Shepherd, who I think is going to be ready to play right out of the gates and is going to give them a really interesting dynamic off the bench. And I just love this team. I think they've got a chance to be a top five defense. And if their offense around Şengün, with some of the other pieces they have, and if Jabari Smith can take a year three leap of sorts, Jalen Green just got a big fat contract. We'll see how he plays this year. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm like super high on them above consensus, but think they've got a really good shot to make the playoffs.
I have the Rockets getting in as my 8 seed in the West. So I'm betting on the depth, the youth, the athleticism, the coaching, all of it. Okay. I put down the Grizzlies. I have the Grizzlies as a top 3 seed in the West. Might have them as the 2 seed. Don't see them going super far in the playoffs. I just think this is a regular season machine so deep that they could withstand they could withstand injuries. Obviously, nothing like last year, suspensions, injuries, but a couple core players could miss a few weeks here and there, and this team could still rattle off 50 something game wins. Obviously, Jaws back. That's the most important thing. But last year was the emergence of Vince Williams Jr. I don't think NBA fans, for the most part, realize that Luke Kennard has been shooting 45% from three on like 6 attempts a game for half a decade. Marcus Smart is back after missing most of last year. Jaren now has someone who can rebound for him because that's kind of the only weakness in Jaren's game. I don't know if Zach Edey is ready for playoff basketball, but I know he's ready for at least 20 minutes of regular season, just banging bodies, rebounding. And for the right matchups, Zach Edey has already shown in preseason that he can bully high level NBA athlete centers. So I just yeah, I'm all in on this team being like 9 deep with really good players. Santi Aldama is awesome, and he's going to be like their eighth man, fourth big on some nights because Brandon Clark is back in the mix, and he just hustles and does a lot of things and has a ton of heart. Obviously, Desmond Bane, one of the best shooters, probably one of the more underrated scorers in the league. Scottie Pippen Jr. looks like a legit backup point guard, and they already have Marcus Smart to kind of be the second point guard at times. So, yeah, I'm all in on the Grizzlies being a regular season machine and maybe not winning more than a round, maybe losing in the first round of the playoffs, getting upset by a 7 or a 6, but winning a ton of games and Ja kind of reminding everyone that when things are right with him, that he is like a legitimate top 8 player in the world.
He's gonna absolutely feast coming off these Zach Edey screens. Like Zach Edey's gonna bring, he's immediately gonna be one of the better screeners in the NBA with how big he is. He's really good about making contact. His rebounding is incredible, and yeah, it's funny for in a draft that was so maligned as not being high on talent. I feel like Zach Edey's one of the rookie debuts that I've been more excited to see recently because most times we think about rookies having to adjust to the NBA. I think there's going to be an adjustment period for the NBA with Zach Edey, with just how big he is. He's immediately the biggest player in the NBA, both height, wingspan, he's up there, and just overall mass, he is the largest. And no one's going to be able to check him one on one, with the exception of maybe like Brooke Lopez can hold up against him. Maybe Steven Adams, maybe Klingon. He's one of the bigger guys in the league, and
Flinging 9-7 standing reach, same as Zach Edey.
yeah, and Klingon did a decent job on him in that national championship game, although Edey eventually started to break through and start fouling everyone out. Just UConn was the way better team. But yeah, I'm really excited to see them. They're super versatile. I've got them as a top 3 seed as well, though think they'll probably lose in the second round. But yeah, love the Grizzlies.
I also put down for the East Orlando. I think Orlando's going to be a top three seed in the East. Another team I don't think is built yet to make a deep playoff run. I just think they're young legs, athleticism, elite defense. If they can just figure out how to play offense a little bit more smoothly, everything takes a little bit of time with Paolo on the ball. Franz's shooting is a question mark. He had a down year from behind the arc last year, but still is so well rounded and like a two-way weapon for them. Orlando, I think, is going to surprise a lot of people and maybe be a better seed than these veteran, all-star, future Hall of Famer laden Eastern Conference teams who are probably more legit contenders.
All right. Let's get to last but not least, bold predictions. I've got two. One is very bold, one is middling bold. But do you want to go first?
Yeah, the bold prediction I had is that the Sixers and the Wolves, two teams who have done so damn much maneuvering to get to where they are now, their current roster configuration, and potentially make a run for the title. I say that they are going to combine for zero playoff series wins.
I'm glad I brought two bold predictions because that was one of them.
Not those two combined.
It was those two, yeah. I
Stop it.
said Sixers and Timberwolves both lose in the first round. We're spending too much time around each other, I think.
Oh no.
I agree. I think Philly, I mean, talk about a bad start to the season. Embiid and Paul George out for their opener
Yeah.
and Embiid out for the first week of the season. Like they are, unless Maxey like turns into, I don't know, somewhere between prime Damian Lillard and prime Steph Curry this season, they're going to struggle to rack up the amount of regular season wins that are needed to be a top four seed in the East, especially with relative regular season juggernauts like Cleveland, who has racked up, damn near 50 wins the last couple of years despite being super banged up. Indiana, who's a regular season maven. Orlando, who with their defense is going to win a ton of games in the regular season. Like those three young teams, I could very easily see Philly being in the play-in again based on the health of their players. And yeah, they have an insane top three in the way that it fits together when they're on the court and healthy and right. But it feels very Clippers-ish, where we're starting this season with both of these guys out and with no clear timetable on when exactly they'll return. And it just seems like they could very easily find themselves in a scenario where, oh, look, they're playing the Knicks in the first round, or they're playing Milwaukee or Boston in the first round. And you don't get to win a playoff series all the time when you play teams like that. And if you're playing Boston and you're Philly, you're never going to win that playoff series probably. So and then Minnesota, I think there's going to be a feeling out period. I think the rest of the West is better. OKC is going to be a juggernaut. Denver, Dallas, or Dallas got better. Denver, they got a little bit worse, but I think Minnesota got potentially a little bit worse with bringing in Randall. I just think their offense is going to be really clunky. Um, and yeah, Memphis is back. There's just a lot of teams in the West where Minnesota could find themselves in that 4 or 5 matchup against like a Dallas or a Denver in the first round. And I see them going home in that matchup as well. So yeah, I
Yeah.
like that bold prediction.
I talked about why I didn't like that trade for Minnesota, the Cat Randall DiVincenzo trade. I've heard some things about Finch, wants Julius to shoot more threes. Even when Julius is making threes, defenses don't treat him like a shooter. I think there's going to be real spacing problems in Minnesota. And even if DiVincenzo continues to snipe like he did last year, I'm just really worried about that offense. And then when it comes to Philadelphia, I'm just taking their word for it. A few weeks ago, I was pretty high on this configuration of Philadelphia. And then Joel Embiid came out and said the regular season doesn't matter to him at all, which obviously is logical, right? Like, as a Philly fan, you want him to be healthy for the playoffs. That's what matters most. But just the quotes have been really bad. And there are a lot of good teams in the East. Like, if you're not playing back to backs and the regular season's an afterthought and you're just going to like miss the first week of the year because you kind of feel like it, you probably will be a playing team. I don't believe you can just flip the switch, kind of coast through a regular season, and then be an awesome, competitive, dangerous playoff team. I just don't believe in that. I've never seen it. Like maybe like LeBron's Cavs teams where he'd be like the 4 seed and then sweep, the Raptors in round one, but there's no LeBron on this Philadelphia team. I just it doesn't make any competitive sense to me. Psychologically, I don't think it's possible to be saying that the regular season doesn't matter and then you're just going to flip a switch and beat the best teams in the East. So I have the Sixers as a 7 seed because they've told me they don't care about the regular season, and I'd love to see them prove me wrong because theoretically the big three they've assembled now like makes a lot of sense. But it just sort of seems like Maxi's the only star on this team who really wants to win a bunch of games.
All right. And my bold prediction is the Detroit Pistons make the play-in. 10 seed, baby. When you're looking at the East, there's a very clear top nine. It's the eight teams we've mentioned, and then the Atlanta Hawks. And once you get past that, like I you've got the Toronto Raptors, which is like, they're a functional team, but I don't know. Do we really see that team making much of a run? And then you have the Brooklyn Nets, they're tanking for flag. The Bulls aren't going to be able to guard anybody with Kobe White, Josh Giddey, and Zach LaVine, and they're probably going to trade Zach LaVine at some point. The Hornets can make a push for 10. The Wizards are going to be one of the worst teams we've seen recently, I think. And when I look at all that and I look at this Pistons team, who I really don't think was as bad as their record was last year, and then I think they made significant improvements to their roster this season, I think they have a really good shot at being the 10 seed in the East, which, is not saying all that much. But Pistons making the play-in from where they've been the last few years of, number one lottery odds almost every single year. That's a big improvement. And one guy who I really want to highlight as well, and we didn't do a ton of preseason reactions, just because most stuff from the preseason doesn't mean anything. Jaden Ivey had a really nice preseason. He was shooting the hell out of the ball. Detroit Pistons hired the Pelicans' old shooting coach, Fred Vinson, who is largely credited with rehabbing Lonzo Ball's jump shot to the point where he was a really good shooter as a point guard, making big strides in Herb Jones's jump shot as well. Brandon Ingram at times too. And he seems to have been in the lab with Jaden Ivey because Ivey's jumper looked really good in the preseason. Small sample size, but he shot 61% from the floor overall, 53% from three, 86% from the line. Obviously, he's not going to maintain those, but it looked smooth. It looked easy. It looked comfortable. And with his speed, his ability to get to the basket, to blow by any defender in the league from a standstill, combined with the spacing environment I mentioned when I was talking about Cade, he could have a real breakout season. And he's a guy who both of us loved coming out of the draft. I had him top five in his class, or top four. I believe you had him up there as well. And in his third season, this could really be the year that he breaks out.
I talked about having the Rockets as the 8 seed. I think last year they were like 25 and 34, and then they ended the season on something like a 16 and 7 run to end up right around 500. I could also see the Pistons settling in and having like a really good end of season run just because they've been tanking for a few years now. This is one of those tanking teams where like at some point you just got to win games for morale, to teach your young guys how to win, to sell tickets. Like I'd be shocked if the Pistons are just like viciously tanking at the end of the year this time around because enough is enough. And the joke within Piston circles is no matter how bad they are outside of the Cade year, they just tend to end up with the 5th pick. And the flattened lottery odds have not been good to them. I just think at some point you've got to start creating some winning habits, and I feel like bringing in the vets they did, Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway, Tobias Harris, like I hope this is that for Detroit, and I think the 10 seed is pretty audacious. It's not the most glamorous, bold prediction for the season, but when you think about it, it would be a huge deal for them. That would be a massive step up.
Yeah, it probably only takes about 35 wins to get it, but I think they can. I think they can get there. Yeah. All right. Any other things you were dying to get out for this season before it gets underway?
I know, nothing else comes to mind. I feel like I got my hottest stuff out in the air. Just really pumped for this season. Gonna try not to talk myself too much into the Lakers and away from the Wolves tonight. I kind of think I was in a good place with both those teams. I have the Wolves as a 4 seed and the Lakers as a 7 seed, and that still sounds about right to me. But yeah, it's great to be back, and really looking forward to the last year of this TNT crew. And I'm just waiting for every Chuck spiel with bated breath.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll be back soon. And yeah, we love you. Peace.
Forrest Irk.